Just a few years ago, this question would have sounded almost impossible in global politics. But in 2026, after months of rising tensions, regional diplomacy, ceasefire negotiations, and shifting alliances in the Middle East, conversations that once seemed unthinkable are now being discussed openly across the world. As the Iran-Israel conflict slowly moves toward a ceasefire and diplomatic settlement, one unexpected country has stepped into the spotlight: Pakistan. Alongside Saudi Arabia and several regional actors, Pakistan has reportedly played an important mediating role in encouraging de-escalation and promoting dialogue. And now, after recent statements from former U.S. President Donald Trump suggesting that both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia should normalize relations with Israel, a new debate has started across political circles, media platforms, and international think tanks. Could Saudi Arabia recognize Israel in the near future? Could Pakistan ever take a similar step? And if diplomatic relations do happen one day, which capital would Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visit first, Riyadh or Islamabad? To understand this discussion, we first need to look back at history. The modern state of Israel was established in 1948, following a United Nations partition plan and the end of British rule in Palestine. Immediately after its creation, conflict erupted between Israel and several Arab states. The issue quickly became one of the most emotional and politically sensitive topics across the Muslim world. For decades, many Muslim-majority countries chose not to formally recognize Israel. The Palestinian issue remained central to their foreign policy positions, especially regarding the status of Jerusalem, Palestinian statehood, and regional stability. Pakistan, since its independence in 1947, has consistently maintained that it would consider recognition of Israel only within the framework of a just and peaceful resolution of the Palestinian issue. Over the years, Pakistani leaders from different political backgrounds largely maintained this position. Saudi Arabia followed a somewhat different path diplomatically, but its public position also remained closely connected to Palestinian statehood and broader regional considerations. However, Middle Eastern geopolitics has never remained static. Over time, some Muslim-majority countries began opening diplomatic channels with Israel. Egypt became the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel in 1979. Jordan later followed in 1994. Then came a major shift in 2020 with the Abraham Accords. Under U.S. mediation, countries like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, followed later by Morocco and Sudan in varying forms of diplomatic engagement. These developments changed the regional conversation entirely. For the first time in decades, normalization with Israel was being discussed not only as a political issue, but also as an economic, technological, and strategic opportunity by some governments in the region. And during this period, reports also began emerging that Saudi Arabia and Israel were involved in quiet back-channel discussions. Although there was never a formal announcement of normalization, international media outlets frequently reported on indirect diplomatic contacts, security cooperation discussions, and American efforts to bring both sides closer together. By 2023 and 2024, many analysts believed Saudi-Israel normalization could eventually happen. But then came one of the most dramatic turning points in recent Middle Eastern history: the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, followed by the Gaza war and widespread regional tensions. The conflict deeply impacted public opinion across the Muslim world and significantly slowed diplomatic momentum surrounding normalization talks. Regional priorities shifted once again from long-term diplomatic planning to immediate security concerns, humanitarian crises, and conflict management. And now, in 2026, after renewed escalation involving Iran and Israel, the Middle East finds itself at another historic crossroads. The recent conflict raised fears of a much wider regional war. There were concerns about attacks spreading across multiple countries, disruptions to energy markets, and growing instability throughout the region. But amid rising tensions, diplomatic efforts intensified behind the scenes. Countries including Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan reportedly engaged in dialogue efforts aimed at reducing escalation and encouraging ceasefire mechanisms. Pakistan, in particular, gained attention for presenting itself as a voice calling for regional stability and diplomatic engagement, rather than military expansion. This diplomatic positioning has strengthened Pakistan's visibility internationally, especially among countries seeking a balanced approach in a highly sensitive environment. Then came the latest statement from Donald Trump. According to recent reports and public remarks, Trump suggested that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan should consider recognizing Israel and normalizing diplomatic relations in the future. The statement immediately triggered debate online and across international media. Some viewed it as part of a broader American strategy aimed at reshaping Middle Eastern alliances after years of instability. Others saw it as a long-term diplomatic vision rather than an immediate policy reality. But the key question remains: how realistic is normalization today? When it comes to Saudi Arabia, many analysts believe the possibility is more open than ever before, though still highly complex. Saudi Arabia has transformed rapidly over the last decade economically and strategically. Under Vision 2030, the kingdom has focused heavily on modernization, global investment, tourism, technology partnerships, and international connectivity. Because of its regional influence, any Saudi move toward Israel would carry enormous geopolitical significance. At the same time, Saudi leadership has repeatedly emphasized that the Palestinian issue remains important, and that any future normalization would likely require broader regional agreements and certain political conditions. In other words, Saudi Arabia appears to keep diplomatic options open while balancing regional sensitivities and domestic public opinion. Pakistan's situation, however, is very different. Unlike some Arab states, Pakistan has no direct historical diplomatic engagement with Israel. Public opinion inside Pakistan has traditionally remained strongly connected to the Palestinian cause, and successive governments have maintained a cautious policy position. At the same time, Pakistan also values strategic relations with major global powers, Gulf countries, and emerging international blocs. Because of this, analysts often describe Pakistan's approach as careful, gradual, and highly dependent on broader regional developments. For now, there is no indication of immediate normalization between Pakistan and Israel, but global politics has repeatedly shown that diplomatic positions can evolve over time when regional realities change. And that is exactly why this discussion has become so important in 2026. The Middle East today is not the same Middle East of the 1980s or even the early 2000s. New economic corridors are emerging. Technology partnerships are reshaping alliances. Energy politics are changing. And countries increasingly prioritize strategic flexibility over rigid bloc politics. At the same time, public opinion, religious identity, historical memory, and regional security concerns continue to play a major role in shaping foreign policy decisions. This means that any future diplomatic breakthrough involving Israel, Saudi Arabia, or Pakistan would likely happen slowly, carefully, and through multiple stages rather than overnight announcements. And perhaps that brings us back to the original question. If relations ever normalize, where would Netanyahu go first, Riyadh or Islamabad? For many observers, Riyadh appears more likely in the near term because discussions between Saudi Arabia and Israel have already existed indirectly for years through diplomatic channels and American mediation efforts. Islamabad, meanwhile, remains a far more complicated and symbolic question due to Pakistan's historical position and domestic political dynamics. Yet history has repeatedly surprised the world. Just a few years ago, even the Abraham Accords seemed impossible to many analysts. Today, they are part of modern Middle Eastern diplomacy. So while no one can predict the future with certainty, one thing is clear. The geopolitical map of the Middle East is evolving once again. And decisions made in Riyadh, Islamabad, Washington, and Tel Aviv over the next few years could shape the region for decades to come. The question is no longer whether the Middle East is changing. The real question is, how far will that change go?